History is not a fixed story carved in stone. It is a living narrative shaped by memory, interpretation, and the biases of those who record it. Many of the events we think we understand are far more complex than the simplified versions taught in classrooms or repeated in popular culture. Misunderstandings arise from myths, propaganda, incomplete evidence, and the human tendency to reduce complicated realities into neat, digestible tales. This journey through 10 of the most misunderstood moments in history reveals how easily truth can be distorted, how narratives evolve over time, and how the past often hides layers of nuance that challenge our assumptions. These events are not just historical curiosities. They are reminders that understanding the past requires patience, context, and a willingness to question the stories we think we know. 10. The fall of Rome was not a sudden collapse. The common image of the Roman Empire collapsing overnight in a dramatic moment of chaos is one of the most persistent misconceptions in history. Yet the truth is far more gradual and complex. Rome did not fall in a single year, or even a single century. Instead, it transformed slowly as economic pressures, shifting borders, cultural integration, and political fragmentation reshaped the empire from within. The so-called fall was less a catastrophic end and more a long transition in which Roman institutions, laws, and traditions continued to influence Europe long after the last emperor in the West was deposed. This misunderstanding persists because dramatic endings are easier to remember than slow transformations, but the reality is that Rome evolved into new forms rather than disappearing. The Eastern Roman Empire survived for nearly 1,000 more years, and many Germanic kingdoms that replaced Roman authority adopted Roman customs, languages, and legal systems. The fall of Rome is not a story of sudden destruction, but of continuity, adaptation, and the enduring legacy of an empire that never truly vanished. 9. Vikings were not horned, helmeted barbarians. Popular culture has painted the Vikings as savage raiders, wearing horned helmets and spreading destruction across Europe. But this image is a product of 19th century romanticism rather than historical fact. The Vikings were skilled traders, explorers, shipbuilders, and settlers who established networks stretching from North America to the Middle East, and their societies were far more complex than the stereotype of mindless warriors suggests. Their helmets were practical and hornless, their craftsmanship was sophisticated, and their legal systems and social structures were surprisingly advanced. The misunderstanding arises from later artistic depictions that exaggerated their appearance for dramatic effect, overshadowing the reality of a culture that valued exploration, commerce, and craftsmanship as much as warfare. The Vikings shaped the political and cultural landscape of Europe through settlement, trade, and cultural exchange, leaving behind a legacy that extends far beyond the myths that surround them today. 8. The Middle Ages were not a dark age. The term Dark Ages suggests a period of ignorance, stagnation, and cultural decline, yet medieval Europe was a time of significant innovation, intellectual activity, and artistic achievement. Universities were founded, architectural marvels such as Gothic cathedrals were constructed, and scientific and philosophical ideas flourished in monasteries and scholarly communities. While the era faced challenges, including disease and political fragmentation, it was far from the cultural void often portrayed in modern narratives. The misconception stems from Renaissance thinkers who sought to elevate their own era by contrasting it with the one before, creating a narrative of darkness that overshadowed the Middle Ages' contributions. In reality, medieval societies preserved ancient knowledge, developed new technologies, and laid the foundations for the scientific and cultural revolutions that followed. The Middle Ages were not a dark void, but a bridge between antiquity and modernity, filled with creativity and transformation. 7. Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake." The infamous phrase attributed to Marie Antoinette has become a symbol of royal arrogance and indifference, yet there is no historical evidence that she ever uttered those words. The quote appeared in writings long before her lifetime and was likely used as political propaganda to portray her as out of touch with the suffering of the French people. In reality, she supported charitable causes, funded orphanages, and showed concern for the poor, though her lavish lifestyle made her an easy target for criticism. The misunderstanding persists because the phrase captures the spirit of the French Revolution's anger, even if it is not factually accurate. It reflects how public perception can be shaped by rumor and political agendas, transforming a complex historical figure into a caricature. Marie Antoinette's story is a reminder that history often remembers people not as they were, but as they were portrayed by their enemies. 6. The Crusades were not purely religious wars. The Crusades are often depicted as straightforward religious conflicts between Christians and Muslims, but the reality was far more complicated, involving political ambition, economic interests, internal rivalries, and shifting alliances that defy simple categorization. Many participants were motivated by land, wealth, or social advancement rather than pure religious devotion, and alliances sometimes crossed religious lines as Christian and Muslim leaders cooperated when it suited their interests. This misunderstanding arises from later narratives that simplified the Crusades into a clash of civilizations, ignoring the nuanced motivations and diverse participants involved. The Crusades reshaped the medieval world through cultural exchange, trade, and political transformation, and their legacy cannot be reduced to a single narrative of religious conflict. Understanding them requires acknowledging the complexity of human motives and the interconnectedness of medieval societies. 5. The Salem witch trials were not driven by mass superstition alone. The Salem witch trials are often portrayed as a frenzy of irrational fear and superstition, but the events were also shaped by political tensions, personal rivalries, economic disputes, and social anxieties within a small, divided community. Accusations were sometimes used as weapons in local conflicts, and the trials reflected deeper issues of power, identity, and control in a society struggling with uncertainty and change. The misunderstanding persists because the trials are often simplified into a cautionary tale about hysteria, overshadowing the complex social dynamics that fueled the accusations. The tragedy of Salem reveals how fear can be manipulated, how communities can fracture under pressure, and how justice can be distorted when reason gives way to suspicion. It is a reminder that historical events often have multiple layers of cause and consequence. 4. The signing of the Declaration of Independence was not a unified moment. The Declaration of Independence is often imagined as a moment of unanimous agreement and patriotic unity, yet the reality was filled with debate, disagreement, and uncertainty. Many colonists opposed independence, some leaders hesitated, and the decision to break from Britain was far from inevitable. The delegates who signed the document took enormous personal risks, and their unity was the result of compromise, persuasion, and political negotiation, rather than spontaneous consensus. This misunderstanding arises from the desire to view foundational moments as clear and heroic, but the truth is that independence was a contested and fragile idea. The story of the Declaration is not one of instant unity, but of struggle, debate, and the courage to embrace an uncertain future. It reminds us that even the most celebrated moments in history are shaped by conflict and complexity. 3. The Trojan War was not a single event. The Trojan War is often imagined as a single, dramatic conflict described in epic poetry, yet archaeological and historical evidence suggests that the story likely reflects a series of conflicts, cultural interactions, and trade disputes that occurred over centuries. The city of Troy was destroyed multiple times, and the legendary war may be a blend of historical events, mythological embellishments, and collective memory passed down through generations. The misunderstanding persists because epic narratives simplify complex histories into coherent stories, but the truth is that the Trojan War is a tapestry woven from myth and reality. It reflects the interactions between ancient civilizations, the power of storytelling, and the ways in which history and legend intertwine. Understanding the Trojan War requires recognizing the blurred line between fact and myth that shapes much of ancient history. 2. The Great Wall of China was not built to keep out all invaders. The Great Wall of China is often portrayed as a single, continuous structure built to keep out northern invaders, but in reality, it is a series of walls, fortifications, and defensive systems constructed by different dynasties for various purposes. Some sections were built to control trade, others to assert territorial claims, and many were never intended to stop large armies but to slow movement and monitor border activity. The wall's effectiveness varied greatly depending on the era and the political situation. The misunderstanding arises from the desire to view the wall as a monumental symbol of defense, but its true history is far more nuanced. It reflects the shifting priorities of Chinese rulers, the challenges of governing vast frontiers, and the complex interactions between settled and nomadic peoples. The Great Wall is not just a barrier, but a record of centuries of political strategy and cultural exchange. 1. The Renaissance was not a sudden rebirth. The Renaissance is often described as a sudden explosion of art, science, and culture that emerged after a long period of stagnation, yet the transformation was gradual and built upon centuries of medieval scholarship, innovation, and preservation of knowledge. Many ideas associated with the Renaissance had roots in earlier periods, and the shift toward humanism, scientific inquiry, and artistic experimentation evolved over generations rather than appearing overnight. The misunderstanding persists because dramatic narratives of rebirth are more appealing than slow, cumulative change. But the truth is that the Renaissance was part of a continuous intellectual journey. It reflects the interconnectedness of historical eras and the ways in which knowledge is transmitted, transformed, and expanded over time. The Renaissance was not a sudden awakening, but a chapter in a much longer story of human creativity and curiosity. These 10 misunderstood moments reveal how easily history can be distorted by myth, simplification, and selective memory. They remind us that the past is rarely as straightforward as it seems, and that true understanding requires looking beyond familiar narratives to uncover the deeper truths hidden beneath. By revisiting these events with fresh eyes, we gain a richer appreciation for the complexity of human history and the countless forces that shape our world.